Welcome to a super fun Ask Us Anything where the main meal today is gonna be unpacking this chart that Laurie shot through to me and said, "Can you talk about this?" And I saw it, went, like, it's got a lot of half-truths in it that are helpful, but a lot of half-truths that aren't helpful and sort of misguiding. Yeah, so I wanted to dive into that, and it's great to have Mike here because he's a insulin blood sugar nerd, chowing down his protein ice cream, looking absolutely jacked, and is sort of his one we prepared earlier to show the different glucose insulin response. So it'll be good to have his input as well. But do you want to give some background on it, Laurie, just to know why we're talking about this and why it's important? And
Well, I found this image, I don't know how long ago, and I've been sharing it because I wanted to sort of dispel the idea that fat did not have an impact
yep,
on our insulin.
yep.
And then I'm not sure at what point I had shared this with you and asked you for your thoughts on it, or if I'd shared it and you gave me your thought. I don't know. But
I don't think you
you
asked. I
said,
just gave you my thoughts. Went, oh, I'm not quite sure about all of that. Triggers me.
right.
So,
And so then I was like, okay, now I really want to know. Explain this chart to me, Marty. That, and I gave you everything I could on where I found it.
yep.
And so please explain the chart to me. What is wrong with it?
Yeah. In the image you've shared, it's from a Twitter post. I've seen these little mountains describing the blood sugar response to carbohydrate, protein, and fat. And then I think they've added Verta Health, but we looked and we couldn't find anything that really linked it to Verta Health, but it sort of aligns with some of the Verta teachings. And then I think they've added the person that shared it added the high impact, moderate impact, low impact, which is also worth discussing for carbohydrate, protein, and fat. Basically, we couldn't find anything that went back to a research study that said this is the actual blood sugar response to carbohydrate, protein, and fat, which is what it's trying to outline. And I suppose the thing that the good thing is that it correctly shows that carbohydrate raises glucose the most and it comes back in a short time. And most people know that because carbohydrate glucose response is quite easy to test. And fat has some response over the long term, which is what you were trying to get across with your posts, that fat does have some glucose response. But this protein one, yeah, it doesn't align with the data because I'll jump through it. So what this is trying to say is that protein has some glucose response, and that's been a belief that's pervasive in the keto movement where people have gone, oh, protein spikes insulin, spikes glucose, therefore protein bad, avoid protein. I want to keep my ketones high, so we'll minimize protein. And that, I suppose I believe that I tried to do it. And then, yeah, I started out looking at the food insulin index data and found that, yeah, protein does require insulin. And maybe if we avoid all protein, we'll be able to lower our insulin, which turned out to be quite a dumb thing to do. So if we jump into, I think if you wanted to fix this, you could say instead of blood sugar, this is the insulin response to the different macronutrients. So the impact of macronutrients on insulin levels. And yeah, there is an insulin response that's quite rapid to carbohydrate, a moderate for protein, and a long term for fat, that it raises insulin. But if we look at this chart here, this has been really helpful for me back 10 years ago when I was trying to understand is protein bad because it raises insulin. And this chart I found from Mark's Basic Medical Biochemistry, which is like a first year medicine textbook, was really helpful. And it went through the insulin, glucagon, and glucose response to different macronutrients. And why is that important? It's a bit nerdy, but what happens when most people eat protein is, yeah, you do get an insulin response. Mike will tell you that when you eat protein, he has to inject as a type 1 some insulin to counteract the glucagon response. So glucagon is sort of the balance point to insulin, and glucagon is the hormone that pushes glucose into our bloodstream. So when you eat protein, glucagon pushes glucose into your bloodstream, and insulin balances that. And generally, most people who are metabolically healthy get a flat-lying glucose response to protein. So that initial, glucose protein response is wrong in metabolically healthy people. In people who have some level of insulin resistance, we do see some rise just because the insulin isn't working as well because they're over fat and the insulin doesn't suppress the glucagon. So, yeah, Mike will have to inject insulin for that, and people who don't produce enough insulin or the insulin resistant may see a rise. But I suppose it's not a reason to avoid protein. Do we have any interim questions? I want this to be an interactive discussion because I think it's a really important concept and there's a lot of different moving parts. So, Laurie, initially, any discussion points so far?
No, to be honest, I was looking through the chats and responding to chat things, and I'll listen to your answers later.
Yeah, and Judy has commented, yes, fun goes off about protein, and like Mike and I and a whole lot of other people, Alex Leaf, have been interacting with Jason for 10 years. Jason was really supportive 10 years ago when I first came out with the food insulin index data, and he shared it and actually helped me get this whole thing off the road way before Laurie found me. But we definitely depart on protein requiring insulin being a good or bad thing. And I suppose that if you say protein requires insulin, therefore, if the main goal is to avoid insulin, you end up with a bad outcome because protein's important. Look at Mike; he's chowing down on the protein ice cream with biceps that are going to motivate me to go do my bench press workout straight after this. Um, so protein is not necessarily a bad thing. Mike, do you want to jump in with any comments or corrections on what I've said so far from your
No, yeah,
experience?
yeah, insulin is critical. Like I used to be on the funk train myself, trying to, drinking the butter coffees and testing my ketones and worried to death about getting my insulin as far down as possible, and sacrificing protein to do that. But you know, insulin is the most anabolic hormone in your body. And without it, then you can't build muscle. You can't do great things. So the goal isn't to get the insulin as low as possible. So Marty's
Mm,
spot on.
mm. And I've got I'll jump to the end of this to show you where I was sort of going with this. And if you look at Mike's, I keep using this because it's so instructive and so useful to show what different dietary approaches lead to. I mean, this is Mike, 380 pounds, injecting 210 units of insulin a day. So because he's big, he needs a lot of insulin. He got the lowest insulin daily dose on fasting and keto and avoiding protein. So yeah, you'll get the lowest insulin, but you also get the worst body composition and you don't have muscle to burn off the energy. So you need to keep on reducing energy more and more and more and more. And, we all know that we become frail and breakable and then fall over and break a hip and then we're stuffed. And like this is more recently with Mike at 250 pounds with 50 units of insulin a day. So it's still a quarter, less than a quarter of the insulin he was taking when he was much bigger. But he's not minimizing insulin, but because he's leaner and more muscular, he's using a lot less insulin. So it's not about minimizing insulin, it's taking enough insulin because insulin is critical to build muscle. And I think even type 1s may have an advantage to build muscle. And, you know, those mass monster bodybuilders will actually inject insulin to make themselves bigger and really lean at the same time. So they just max out their muscle with more insulin. So, it's not about minimizing insulin, it's about improving body composition. You'll get lower insulin, but it won't be negligible insulin. And then, like, this is this chart that I keep on throwing around that confuses people. But what it says is that if you've got a higher fat-free mass index, you've got more muscle, you live longer. And if you've got less fat, you live longer. And Mike sort of pushed himself to a very high level of muscle mass with an A1C of, I think it was 4.9. I've seen down at 4.8 before. So you'll have excellent blood sugars with 420 grams of protein or whatever insane amount you're eating at the moment. So he's
Okay,
got an amazing A1C
so
and great blood sugars with
Marty,
a lot of protein. Lori.
Marty, go back to that chart again, because this is that graph you just had up there.
Oh yeah.
Go
People want to
back
see
to
the
that,
graph. This is great.
and well, it's not necessarily that they want to see it, but this is a good opportunity for anybody that's brave enough to say, I don't see it, I don't understand it, but I want to understand.
Yeah.
And they've been trying to listen to you explain this. And so this is a good opportunity for anybody to unmute their mic and say, please explain the graph again. What I want to say to you while we're
Yep.
waiting for anybody to do that is just this morning, Laura Sloat, who's done one of your interviews,
Yeah. She's amazing.
she she was sharing some old fasting insulin
Oh,
tests.
really?
And I do think that one of the groups of the ladies I hang out in, they're going to get the idea that the goal is to get their fasting insulin down to the lowest that they can, because they're trying to break through and lose weight.
Mm.
But are you and Mike saying that it is actually better to not focus on that number? Is that what you would say
Yeah,
to us
if you're fearing all insulin, it can lead to the poorer metabolic health outcomes and poorer body composition. Because if that means you're avoiding protein, because it has some insulin response, then your body composition turns to garbage. Trying to find nice words, but if you end up eating less protein, losing muscle, you become frail, your basal metabolic rate drops, and you have to drop your energy intake more and more. Meanwhile, Mike is pounding 4,000 calories a day and losing body fat like there's no tomorrow because he's got this massive metabolic engine of a lot of muscle that he's built with lifting and protein. So, and I think that's the goal. I mean, look at him today, is the extreme example of how
Yeah,
much muscle
and
you can build. It's hard to
I'm
argue with
eating
what you see
a
on
ton
the
of
image
carbs
there.
too. Yeah.
Yeah. For a type 1, that's outrageous. Like, especially you're doing 200-ish grams of carbs and actually quite low fat, which is what a lot of bodybuilders do to get the way Mike looks today. I
okay,
didn't ask
so
him to
then
show up in a muscle shirt, but it works well.
it's great for today. So
Keeps the ladies
I
entertained.
I know we got a couple hands up, and hang on there, ladies, just a second, because Leslie, before we started recording, she was talking about her diet being heavily, her culture being heavily carb focused.
Yep.
But it's working for her as long as she keeps her protein low. So talk to us about that, because then we could think, okay, so protein isn't, I'm feeling
Yeah.
confused.
Yeah, no, that is confusing. We don't want you to maximize protein. I'm gonna show another graph. You're warned. My favorite protein graph. Like the focus is on increasing protein percentage, not necessarily eating more protein in grams. So a lot of people in our macros class, they might be eating, say, 80 grams of protein, and we might nudge them up to 85, 90. But because we're pulling back the fat and or carbs, their protein percentage might go from 20 to 30%. So it's not about force feeding yourself more protein. It's about prioritizing protein and getting a higher percentage of energy from protein that then generates the satiety. So because your body craves protein, once you get the protein you need, your appetite settles down, and that's the number one thing you can do to trigger increased satiety. But it's not about eating 400 grams of protein. It's about eating maybe a little bit more protein, but pulling down your carbs and fats. So yeah, like I think over the long term, people do a lot better on a higher protein percentage. I think Miley's doing 45, 50 and absolutely thriving. And I think Mike is trying to crack 60 or 70, which is just, don't try that. It's hard to do, but yeah, it's working for him. What's your protein percentage now,
Okay.
Mike?
Um, I think I'm probably around 54%. I've kind of dialed it back a little bit since the macros class. I'm eating a lot more fruit and veg now, so
Yeah. So
Okay, so
the trap is the 12% protein. That's your Macca's and Pizza Hut and everything there, and as which is just enough protein to keep us interested. And as we increase the protein percentage, we eat less. Laurie, what were you saying?
okay, so I know that Ren's wheels are turning now, but hold on, Ren, because we got Kathy's hand up, and
Kathy,
Susan, and
before she
ladies, I'm
forgets.
sorry, I don't remember who had their hand up first, so Kathy gets to go first because she had a stroke.
I've never actually got my benefit from the stroke. Yeah, today I'm forgetting things. So I'm like, what am I going to ask? I'm so distracted by this muscle that I'm seeing, Mike. I mean, my brain is just going, is that is that
Thanks, Kathy.
real or is that balloons? I mean, honestly. But anyway, here's my question. And this is kind of, it's one of my random questions, Marty. Um, so it's bad to be over fat
Yep,
and it's bad to be under muscle.
that's it.
Here's my th
The
here's my
the
thinking,
end. We can
okay?
shut up now.
Okay. So no, no, come on my trip with me. So
Yep.
here's what this is my thought because I can't focus on two things very well. I just can't. So
Yep.
I'm trying to get under fat first. Maybe I'm doing it backwards so that I can build muscle more easily. Does it matter which one is better? I mean, help me here.
Uh, no, that's a really good question. And after we did a Q&A a few weeks back that Laurie was mentioning this chart, and that's what this answers, because most of the time we focus on weight or BMI or waist to height, but this breaks BMI down into the fat-free mass index versus the fat mass index rather than just the body mass index. So it can definitively answer that question if you know your weight, height, and estimated body fat percentage. It can tell you whether I need to lose more fat to get down to about here, or you need to gain muscle. Both are good, but yeah, definitely some people have looked at this and gone, oh yeah, I've reached my like Laura, I'm lean enough. Like Miley, same bag. They found, right, I've got my body fat down to the right point. I need to build muscle to balance that. So, and then once you build more muscle, you're burning more energy, so you lose more fat more easily. And if you've got no muscle, you have to just keep on cutting your calories to ridiculous levels, like
Oh,
800,
should you build
700.
more muscles so that you do burn the fat? Because I mean, I haven't built back up to where I was before, and Um, my weight's kind of just staying maybe up and down a couple of pounds, so it's not
Yep.
going down as quick as it was before.
Mm,
But I know it'll go up with the muscle too.
mm.
So should I mean, I know I'm being a little redundant,
Yeah.
but should I work on the muscles so that I do lose more of the fat? Does that make
Like
sense?
likely answer is yes, but if I had your data, I could do one of those little charts for you and tell you precisely. But a lot of the people that we've done the numbers for find that to minimize my risk of dying of any cause, which is that hazard ratio on that chart. Muscle mass is the important thing. I need to chase more than more fat loss because
It's
a
not
lot of people
mutually
focus on
exclusive.
dieting to get littler, but then they lose muscle in the process, and that's what the weight loss drugs will do as well. You get lighter, but you'll also, like you've found, Kathy, if you're on the weight loss drugs, you don't crave the protein anymore, so you lose the muscle. And yeah, then you just have to keep taking the drugs to keep the calories down, and you lose more and more muscle and bone mineral density because you're not eating enough calcium and protein and everything. Sorry, Mike, what were you saying?
I was just saying the two are not mutually exclusive. You can do a successful body recomp, so you should be focusing on both fat loss and muscle building at the same time.
Yeah,
Am I
So,
not building any muscle by walking? I mean, that's what I'm doing right now because that's what I'm
right.
mentally able to do and physically able to. Does that
Mhm.
not build any muscle by walking?
No, it doesn't.
No resistance. Okay.
Nope.
Oh well.
it may do a little bit. Like I'm getting my wife to wear the weighted vest when we're walking, and she's getting into that to build a bit more muscle. But to really, once you can do basic walking and maybe with a weighted vest, I'm going to get the next stage is going. Let's hit the gym and actually lift something heavy, which you were doing before with your trainer, Kath, and that might really help.
All right. Thank you. When we work on it, I'll reach out to Jamie.
Go back to Jamie.
Yep. Yep. Thank you.
Where are
Susan,
we at,
can you
Lori?
unmute? Susan's had her hand up and then Ren has her hand up.
I've been trying to wean myself off protein powders, but I just had a very slight question about if it is their glucose and insulin profile similar to, something like meat, or is it like other ultra processed foods that it has a different profile? That
Yeah,
might
powders are good if you're a bodybuilder and just worked out and you want to hit the muscles to recover and grow really quickly. But in terms of satiety and, it's ideal for really quickly replenishing protein, um, if you've worked out. So that can be helpful. But if you want long-term satiety and maximum nutrient density, you want to steer away from powders and bars and anything that's pre-processed because it just goes through your system a lot quicker. So they're not evil. The powders, I'll mix the powders into Greek yogurt for breakfast a lot of the time. But for maximum satiety, nutrient density, uh, you want to keep that to a minimum and opt for your whole foods if you can.
so it does digest more quickly, which implies that any spikes would be sooner and maybe
Yeah,
higher because it's
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and
I
and
added
bodybuilders are trying to get a rapid insulin response to build muscle. They actually want that. Um, and if you're insulin resistant, you may see some rise in glucose because your insulin and glucagon aren't balanced perfectly. Um, but yeah, yeah, you, you don't want to minimize protein if you're insulin resistant, but you ideally want to go for whole food proteins if you can.
Yeah, I added the protein powders to recipes and things
Yeah,
to boost the protein amounts. So
which is great. Yeah, and that'll help boost the protein of a whole food recipe that will digest more slowly.
thank you.
This one question is going to take the whole hour, which is good. So,
Okay. Ren, you want to give it a go?
Ren,
Yeah, I want to go back to your 45% protein thing because I got to use my teacher brain here. And I can't be the only one who heard you say this numerous times and then just really it kind of blew over my head until I thought of it in terms of calories.
Yeah.
And it made it make much more sense to me. So I'm just going to say this because maybe there's somebody else out there that didn't think of it this way. But I think when you talk about 45% or 40%, whatever it
Yep.
is, that's basically 400 calories if I'm eating 1,000 calories,
Yep.
right? I'm doing
Yeah.
the math right. Or 600 calories if I'm eating 1,500 calories.
Yeah.
So that to me is just an easier way to think of it than
Yeah.
the percentage, unless of course I'm doing it in chronometer or whatever.
Yeah.
But I just throw that out because maybe someone else thinks like I do and just needs to hear that.
That's handy.
I
You're a
don't know.
good teacher, Ren. You should be. Oh, you were a teacher. That's right.
Yeah, was. I'm good.
And we got Rick. Hey, I did your perfect day reports, and you and your wife are absolutely killing it. I'm gonna have to increase the diet quality targets for you and Miley and Ikuko because you are smashing it. I want to get you on for an interview later to interrogate you on how it feels to max out your diet quality score. You look like you're doing great. Anyway, shut up. I'm gonna let you
Thank you so
talk.
much for saying that. I think we're been just taking it a day at a time and a step at a time, and really seeing what other optimizers like Miley and others have been doing. I think thank you for running our perfect day reports in the micros because we're going out of town next week and we're going to be in unfamiliar food territory. So, but I guess my question is just we're always looking for plant-based sources of protein, and we
Yep,
have been doing a kind of a variation on the Green Hulk smoothie, but we
yep.
use tofu as a base. But we noticed that the tofu isn't in our perfect day report, or if it is, it's like very little bit of tofu, and we're just kind of wondering
Yeah.
maybe why that is and your
Well,
thoughts about
I think
that.
the seafood and the cod and the other things in your report were just a bit better than tofu. But if tofu
Oh.
was all you can get, tofu and seitan and whatever are not bad, but the other animal, seafood, dairy sources of protein give a slightly better overall diet quality profile. So yeah, we can,
Oh.
and it's great to see people like you who are incorporating those sort of plant-based proteins and doing really well.
Mhm.
Yeah, obviously your baseline diet quality was awesome. But just when we optimized it, it's like, yeah, the cod and other stuff pushed out
Yeah.
the plant-based options.
Yeah, it's just a real plug for just getting a high protein early in the day just really sustains you, and that was
Yeah,
kind of a big game changer for us, just allowing us to be feeling full all day and just not,
yeah,
Lizzie not waking up so much. So that's really wonderful. That's always been the downfall. So anyway, but we just wanted to ask about the tofu, so thanks for the answer.
yeah, yeah. And that's really the other. You guys are examples of what I'm trying to get across is that don't avoid protein because it may raise, may impact glucose a little bit. And yes, it needs insulin. Type 1s definitely need to inject insulin in response to protein. And that was a game changer for me and really helps a lot of type 1s. Better dose for insulin.
Mhm.
And I think the work I've done in the food insulin index is really helpful for type 1s. But
Mhm.
the keto community have taken that and gone, oh, insulin bad,
Mhm.
protein bad, avoid protein, minimize protein to keep ketones high. And yeah, you lose muscle mass, you've got low satiety, and you you don't want to melt like an uncontrolled type 1 diabetic because an uncontrolled type 1 diabetic, all their muscle and fat just leaches into the bloodstream. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's a bad way to die. And you don't want to choose to try and do that to yourself because you can't anyway. Yeah, anyway,
Yeah.
rant over.
Yeah.
So,
One thing I was going to say, it's going to be very, we've done the data-driven fasting, which I think is insulin signals now.
Yep.
Before, it's going to be we're going to do it when it comes up again, and it'll be really interesting to compare our insulin response and what happens
Yeah.
with our insulin signal and just blood sugar
Yeah.
with eating with the macro micro approach that
Yeah.
we've developed. And
Yeah, that'll
that's
be
going to be
cool. It'll
real.
be people do glucose signals and then take then dial in what they eat and come back to it and find that they both work really nicely together.
Yeah. Thank you.
okay, Marty, so is this why you were getting on me about taking my ketones and comparing that to my glucose because it was getting my attention off to the side where I didn't need to be. It didn't really matter what was going on with my ketones. It mattered most of all that I paid attention to the glucose and I
Yeah,
just
yeah, exactly,
hit that
exactly.
target.
If you're focusing on your premeal glucose, which means you're draining your excess energy in your body, that leads to a better body composition. Everything else works itself out. Your blood sugars, your insulin, your ketones will be perfectly fine. And Dr. Boz and a lot of other people have talked about the glucose ketone index. And if we drink fat and maybe have a can of sardines a day, we can get our glucose low and our ketones really high. But if you're getting no protein, you're going to be, if to do that, you need to avoid protein, which come with nutrients. Where does that lead long term? You're losing muscle mass, your basal metabolic rate is lowering. Meanwhile, Mike is pounding 400 grams of protein and lifting heavy and burning 4,000 calories a day. And his need for energy is going up and up and up while he's getting leaner and leaner and leaner. And everybody else, I hate seeing people go the other way that have to go, oh, I'm eating 700 calories a day. So I need to eat 600 calories a day now to keep. And you can't back yourself into a corner like that. It's just a really awful way to live because you're getting cold and miserable, and then your body just goes, stuff this. We're just buying 20 cartons of donuts and we're not going to stop.
All right, Ren, why don't you go with your question?
All right, this has been on my mind for a while. And Miley and Mike, you might want to, I don't know if this is something you experienced as well, but I've heard both Laura and Belinda last week mention that in their process, they hit a point where it just felt like the weight just was just coming off easily. And my wonder is, do you have any idea what's going on there? Is this something on the inside? Does their insulin get to a certain, is it their fasting insulin gets to a certain point, their A1C gets to a certain point, the ratios? Do you have any idea? Because both of them were very specific about it wasn't necessarily that they did anything different, but they got to a certain point where it was just
Magic
happening.
happens. Yeah, and
Exactly.
some people hit that magic. Maybe Miley can jump in after this, but how do we get the magic to happen? I think Belinda and Miley have both gone deep into the micros. Macros will get you the protein, which is the foundation. So once your body gets the protein you need, it goes, oh, I'm not craving protein. I've hit that full signal for my protein and I've got heaps of energy stored on my body that I'm happy to use. But if you level up and get the minerals and vitamins at the same time that we also crave, your body just goes, well, why do I need more food? I've got all the nutrients I need. I can use the energy on my body. And that's sort of the magic of really being able to cut calories low or the body not craving more energy and offloading the excess energy because it's getting maximum nutrient density. But yeah, that takes a bit of tweaking and a bit of quantification. Miley, do you have any commentary on you've just kept losing of like a
Yeah,
significant rate for a year?
for me it was pretty consistently losing. I'd average about 5 pounds a month. But it's like Rick was saying, all the programs are complementary. They all kind of work together. So if you do the glucose signals and then the macros and then the micros. They build on each other
Mm,
and you learn different things about yourself. So there
mm.
wasn't really a breakthrough moment. It was just like a progressive train that's kept moving along.
You just kept following the specification and the recipe to get.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
loved how you said I focus on getting those harder to find nutrients at the top of my fingerprint chart and just kept chasing that. And look at you now. So it's very cool.
We've got a question in the chat that I'm not sure we answered, and that would be my fault because I'm trying to do both things, listen and chat. Are powders considered processed food? Which I would say yes, but Marty?
Slightly, yeah. They're not optimal, but they're not bad.
Right, because there was Mike sitting there chowing down the protein ice cream
Yeah.
earlier. So, Mike, would you comment on, you've been using a protein powder at the end of your day. Tell us about the thing because not everybody was here to hear that. So, could you
Yeah.
explain that for us?
Yeah, I only use powders if I'm eating protein ice cream or if I'm at risk of getting less than 300 grams of protein a day, which is my floor target. Otherwise, I agree with Marty. I think eating whole food sources of protein is really better from a satiety point of view and from like a micronutrient point of view. Um, otherwise, yeah, I don't think protein powders are or if you're having trouble hitting your protein targets, I think that's the best reason to use protein powder. So
Sort of like
that's
an
what I would say
interim
about it.
crutch, but you should try to
Yeah.
transition to whole foods if you can. Especially if you're
Yes.
trying to lose. If your main goal is weight loss, then Miley's not using a ton of maybe a little bit of protein powder occasionally, but it's mainly whole food and a lot of it looks like a mountain of vegetables, but 50% of the energy is from protein because she's got the seafood and meat and dairy in there.
Yep. But if you wake up in the morning, you're running late for work and you don't have time to put a nutritious breakfast together and you can't hit your protein macros for the morning, there's
Yep.
nothing better than throwing together a couple of scoops of whey powder and some water and eating that. That's way better than nothing.
Yeah.
It's just important to hit your protein macros. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Mike, would you say it's way better to do that than to skip that first meal of the day?
Absolutely. Yep. Because the more I used to be really into fasting, like extended fasting, intermittent fasting, and then I learned, as it became a goal to grow muscle, I learned more about muscle protein synthesis and the fact that we need a constant stream of aminos in our bloodstream. We have a good way of storing fat. We have a good way of storing carbohydrate, but our bodies really don't have a good way of storing protein. So when
Mm.
you think about that, you think of how important it is to constantly keep protein as a priority with all your meals.
Mm.
So I'm eating protein constantly throughout the day, 4 to 5 times a day. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Leslie
Cool.
just commented, that's the beauty of this program, especially lifetime membership, which is now no longer a thing, unfortunately. You can keep coming back, and as Miley said, with each class, you learn something different about yourself.
Yeah.
Marty, I want to go back. I want to ask you, do you feel like you have given what you want to share about the three hills, the three colored hills?
I've got a few more slides if I could jump through those quickly, and then you guys can pepper me with more questions if that's cool. So
Okay.
as Mike was saying, there's no we have a little bit of space in our blood for labile proteins and amino acids, which, just a minute amount of maybe 20 calories worth of protein is stored in our body, but the rest is stored on our muscles. But protein isn't a great source of stored energy other than on our muscles. And if we need more protein, it comes from our muscles. And we don't really want to lose our muscles, but we have a solid amount of storage capacity for glucose in our blood, glucose in our liver, and a massive capacity to store body fat. And what does insulin do? I see it rather than a lot of people use the analogy of it pushes, energy into us, into our body, and that's bad. And if we eat carbs, we get high insulin, which is like the train conductor pushing more and more people onto. And that's sort of correct if someone is running around jabbing you in the bum with an insulin needle all day. And if that's happening, call the police. But that doesn't happen. Your pancreas doesn't make more insulin than you need for the amount of body fat you've got, the amount of muscle you've got. The more muscle is, will require a little bit of insulin to hold on your body, but most importantly, the amount of food coming in through your mouth. So you can see here you've got all the fuel tanks are full. Insulin's going to need to be higher to hold all that energy in storage to stop your body leaching into your bloodstream like an uncontrolled type 1 diabetic. The way to reduce your insulin is to deplete all of those storage tanks, which in DDF, or glucose signals now, we use mild intermittent fasting, waiting until your glucose is depleted to refill your glucose stores. And when your glucose gets depleted, you can tap into your body fat. And if you keep doing that, you'll lower your overall insulin. And part of it is reducing carbs, but part of it is also reducing fat while getting the protein and nutrients that you need. So that's the secret to lowering your insulin level. And rather than worrying about insulin and hyperinsulinemia and insulin bad, insulin, tell me where the insulin hurts you. It's really, it's the energy that's stored in your body from a low satiety, low nutrient density diet that leads to energy toxicity. So if you've got excess stored energy on your body, you need more insulin to hold that in storage. So I think the focus needs to turn away from avoiding protein. Maybe you don't need more carbs, but fat isn't a free food. And I suppose that's one of the things that this image sort of alludes that maybe, fat, low insulin spike, therefore it could be misinterpreted to say fat is, if there's a free food, it's fat, which, fat's a great source of energy, but if you've got plenty stored in your body, then you don't need it. So the secret to lowering insulin is not avoiding protein. A lower BMI will align with a lower daily insulin requirement. A lower BMI will also align with a lower fasting insulin. All from our DDF challenges, we see that a lower fasting glucose aligns with a lower weight, which will also align with lower insulin. Again, in glucose signals, we chase a lower pre-meal glucose, which aligns with that. We talked about that chart. Then we've got the food insulin index data, which this chart is actually quite confusing, so I'm not going to try and explain it to you. But back in 1997, they did a study at the University of Sydney where they tested 28 foods at the time and looked at the change in insulin under the curve over 2 hours. And it's only the thing I need to point out, it's only 2 hours, and really there's no other data that tests the insulin response to food over a longer period. So yeah, we focus on carbohydrate as raising insulin and raising glucose because we've only got short-term data. Nobody's testing other than Mike and maybe my wife or me with my wife's type 1 data, the longer term holistic response to the other macronutrients. So keep in mind that we just don't have good data on the insulin response to food over a long period of time. But from this data, 10 years ago, I started looking at to try and understand how to optimize my wife's diet, what things raised insulin. The food insulin index is the area under that curve. So things that spike insulin over 2 hours have a higher food insulin index. So for protein, as you increase protein, the food insulin index tends to trend down. So the foods that have the highest protein percent have a moderate insulin response. Like we said, protein does require some insulin, but it's often these higher satiety foods that over the longer term, will require less insulin because you're losing body fat and you'll be lighter. So if you prioritize satiety, the long-term insulin response will be lower. And then the glucose response to protein from the data shows that a higher protein percentage tends to lower glucose. So you've got watermelon and pears and various things in the top left here that are really high carb that are spiking your glucose. You could go for really high fat things in the bottom left corner to not spike your glucose, or you could go for really high protein, high satiety, nutrient dense foods in the bottom right, which tend to have a lower lower glucose response, largely because they displace crappy carbs in a diet. I've got a ton of these charts that I used to live on to show that a higher protein diet tends to have a lower glucose response. Interestingly, they did a study with type 1 diabetic kids. I don't know how it got approved, but they said let's look at different amounts of fat without dosing for insulin. And fat actually lowers the glucose over 3 hours, but after 3 hours, it starts to rise again. So high doses of fat tend to actually raise glucose over the longer period. And that's what we see in the DDF challenges. When people lower fat, their pre-meal glucose comes down earlier. And I wanted to highlight these little notes on the chart that Laurie shared. Carbohydrate does turn to glucose very quickly. That is correct. This says that 50% burns to glucose spike starting 2 to 4 hours. And that sort of triggers me a little bit because if you're only just getting enough protein, that your body's going to say, let's put that away and build muscle. Let's use that for all the absolutely critical things that the body needs protein for. It's not going to go, let's burn the wood to build the house when it's got other forms of energy. So if you do have more than the minimum required amount of protein, half of that can turn to glucose through gluconeogenesis, but most of the time, most people aren't eating excess protein. So protein as an energy source is really not a thing unless you're really pushing it super high. And interestingly, fat can turn to glucose. The glycerol backbone of the fat molecule can also turn to glucose, which will require an insulin response. So there's really no free food from a glucose or insulin perspective, but protein, because it's so satiating, is going to help you reduce glucose and insulin just because it enables you to intake less energy. That was a long rant. Any questions or reflections on that?
So, Mike, I would like you to answer Mimi's question. She says, where do we want our fasting insulin to be? Below 10? And then Judy says under 5 or 6. And then you're answering, Mike, gluconeogenesis is demand driven. So wrap all that together and help us understand whether, because I know I got a group of ladies that are now going to be focusing on going out to test their insulin, their fasting insulin, and they're going to focus on it. But I want to be able to say yay or nay to that idea.
Well, as far as fasting insulin, I mean, I'm not a medical professional, but I believe optimal is like around 1, I think. I want to say, I don't want to speak out of turn. That's really outside of my wheelhouse, but
Yeah,
in
I
terms
think
of,
under 5 is amazing.
yeah,
1 is you probably might want to check if you're type 1 diabetic,
yeah, I'm not sure.
but yeah,
That's one
no,
thing I don't know about.
but you get a low fasting insulin from having amazing body composition. You don't get it through avoiding protein and avoiding carbs, especially if it leads you to eat more because you're not getting satiety or nutrient density and end up getting fat because you went, oh, this, MCT oil and butter is a free food because some keto guru told me that I can turn off my pancreas by avoiding protein and carbohydrate. the route to getting low fasting insulin is having more muscle and less body fat, which is, the way Laurie and Miley and everybody else and Belinda have done it is by getting the nutrients you need that turns off your appetite. It's not avoiding protein. Sorry, do you remember the rest of Laurie's question? I don't, Mike.
Gluconeogenesis. So all I was saying with that is the 40 to 50% of protein that gets turned into glucose. I was just kind of saying that the gluconeogenesis, it's a demand-driven process. So when there's not enough carbohydrate or other energy sources in the blood, then the body will shift its resources to turning protein into glucose. But it's a really difficult process for your body to do. And that's something also why I'm more of a fan of adding actually more carbohydrate into your diet, because it's actually protein sparing. So it'll spare the protein that you eat and this protein on your body if you eat, just throw in a little bit of carbohydrate just to satisfy that. So
yeah, your body can make glucose from protein, but it would prefer not to.
Right.
It would prefer to get a little bit from your diet. So that's where the lowest satiety and the best satiety outcome and the most nutrient dense outcome is around 20% carbs, and taking your carbs down to zero doesn't seem to benefit, I think, because your body wants some carbohydrate in your diet.
Right.
And if you're
that's
lifting
why
like a maniac like Mike and need to do explosive, powerful activities,
yeah,
a little bit more might be
that's why
good. But if you're more sedentary, a little bit lower. Sorry, Mike, I'm going to shut up.
that's why I'm of the opinion that I used to be carnivore. I used to think, low carb is good, then zero carb is the best. But now I really think that, having carbs in your diet is probably more optimal than going zero carb, just from a performance point of view. But that's just my opinion. So, and that's one of the reasons.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Ren, she just put up her hand.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Mike. So, like, where do you get your carbs from? What are your favorite? Are you just getting fruits and vegetables?
Fruits and vegetables these days, it comes from dairy. I'm actually eating a lot of fruit these days, so a lot of citrus, apples. I eat tons and tons of berries. I eat tons of edamame. That's my
No, I
favorite.
picked up on that one from you. Thank you for that.
I
It's
love
surprisingly
edamame. It's like one of my
nutritious and
favorites.
satiating.
Yes. And that's about it. And otherwise, if I have low blood sugars, then I'll treat with pure dextrose. But that's the only other source of. I do track the low blood sugar treatments in my macro tracking, but otherwise, that's really where I get most of my carbs. So,
Thank you.
Okay, and Judy has she has a comment that I want to make sure we get in. She said, Tara, who's here, and I have been discussing cortisol issues and inflammation, insulin, vicious cycle, and how that sabotages fat loss. Also having a couple they each have some autoimmune issues. Unless and until you can get a grip on adrenal fatigue, kind of futile, question mark. What do you have, anybody have something?
Yeah, I suppose on the cortisol, pushing your body to produce all the glucose from protein, by going really, really low carb can drive glucagon and cortisol higher, and it's a more stressful process. So again, going back to what Mike said, having some carbs in your diet is perfectly fine. But in glucose signals and all our programs, we balance that with, if it rises by more than 30 milligrams per deciliter after you eat, then you probably don't need quite that much carbohydrate. So, but any weight loss is going to be stressful to some degree, and that's why we keep saying do it at a sustainable pace, whatever that is for you.
Right, that I was going to bring that in because I know she was pushing hard, and then she kind of had to back off a little bit. But so, and then with your teaching, you'd like us to have carbs. Mike's telling us that carbs are helping him a lot more so than fat was. I think I'm hearing you say, Mike. And so if if we get in some really healthy carbs, but not such that they spike us to more than 30 points from where we started, from where
Yeah.
we started. So
Yeah,
that
so
would be helpful
we've
to
got that
us.
chart in that we use all the time in glucose signals. We want to see a gentle rise to less than 30 grams, and then it drops back down within 5 or 6 hours. It's not flatline glucose that we're after. Some rise is not a normal part of appetite signaling, but if you see a massive rise over 30 milligrams per deciliter on a regular basis, especially if it's come crashing down, then yeah, you probably didn't need that much carbohydrate because maybe you're not as active. It depends on your activity levels. Laurie's walking all the time, and yeah, she lives on a higher carb diet. But if you're more sedentary, you may not need as much carbohydrate. But tracking your glucose with simple glucometer can be really helpful to help you understand. But what we do see is that fat is not a free food. It will keep your glucose elevated. And that was sort of the point that Laurie said initially, that she was trying to say fat does have an impact on glucose and insulin, just more mellow and over the longer term. And just because it's lower over 2 hours doesn't mean it's not still working at 12 and 18 hours if you had a lot of fat. So, yeah, we just don't know much about that. Although we will when Mike has got his 5 years of insulin glucose A1C body composition data for me to analyze, and we're going to, full nerd out on that to look
Still
at,
working on that, Marty. I'll have that to you. I'll try
yeah,
and
so
finish that this week.
but oh no, no rush. It's a bit massive job, but to be able to see, is it body fat? Is it carbohydrate? Is it protein? Is it fat? Is it muscle? And how much each factor um, impacts your need for insulin. To have that data, I think, will be really powerful, and it's really exciting. And yeah, what we want to avoid is that carb fat combo that keeps the glucose and insulin elevated for longer. So yeah, by prioritizing a higher protein percent, um, you'll avoid those foods. You'll feel satiated and you won't crave the pizza and donuts and that junk. So prioritize protein, especially in the morning. Protein in the morning often actually drops our blood sugar because that little bump from insulin will help us drop our glucose. High protein percentage. There's the charts from Mike. And just finally, there was a question from Mimi that she mentioned in the chat here as well. Does egg white raise blood sugar? On days that I eat more egg white with little fat, my glucose runs higher. And as we've said, if your body needs glucose and you're eating protein, it can take it from the diet, the protein in your diet. And imagine if you've been minimizing protein and then you give yourself a bit of protein, it'll go, oh, hooray, we don't have to use our muscles for glucose anymore. We can get it from the egg white. We can take this egg white or protein and turn it to glucose. And your glucose may be a little bit higher, but if over the long term that's leading to more muscle, less fat, who cares if it bumps your glucose by just a little bit? Because everything will go in the right direction over the long term. Can take a
Okay,
breath.
let's try to get Mark's question in. He said he came in late. He has a comment and a question. I have experimented 3 separate times now to see what I can do to lower my waking glucose, and I'm always above 120. I have had a low carb mini meal late at night, a couple of hours before bed, and those readings are 111, 114, 113.
Yep.
When I don't do this, I am above 120. Can you explain this?
Yeah. Waking glucose is largely a factor of, are you above your personal fat threshold? So if we go back to this chart here, having a higher BMI and having aligns with high insulin required to keep that energy in storage and a higher fasting glucose. So generally, um, lowering, there you go. So a lower weight aligns with a lower fasting glucose, and the way we get there in glucose signals is by chasing a lower premeal glucose, which aligns with a lower body mass index. So, being leaner and more jacked, will lower your fasting glucose. Short-term hacks, lowering fat at night, finishing eating earlier, they're just short-term mini hacks. But if you wanted to really nail it, it's getting stronger and leaner. From wherever you are, you don't have to be, a stage competitive bodybuilder. It's just, everybody's on that quest. Everybody's a bodybuilder, as Ted Naiman says, to some degree, trying to keep up their body muscle mass and lower their body fat.
Okay, we hit 5 o'clock, but maybe you want to try to answer. Looks like Mark did a follow-up about a question about the tracking. Is there a way, or will there be a way, to isolate the waking before and after numbers on the online graph and download so I can input that into a spreadsheet?
At the moment, it's just in the app. There's no export function in the glucose signals data-driven fasting app. So, but if you're tracking it on the Contour Next, there's an app that you can send the data to the app and actually extract the data from that.
Okay, we're 1 minute after time. So if you have follow-up questions, they're very helpful to have in the community. And I just put a link into the community. If you're not already part of it, you can click on that. It'll take you in and you can put a question in. And it's great to have those questions because other people, if you have a question, other people have questions.
Yeah.
They're just not asking them.
And to wrap up, just to tell you what's happening, we've got next week, we're chatting with Melissa Craig, who's just been an awesome inspiration to me and just chipping away at being anti-fragile. She talks about being anti-fragile and she's had a massive nutritional and health journey. And yeah, I love these optimizers who inspire me. So I'm getting inside her head next week. These interviews have been a ton of fun. We just kicked off the Micros Masterclass, which people were raving about. Mindset Mastery starts on the 15th of March, and then Glucose Signals, the next round, starts on the 29th of March. And by that time, we'll have our new subscription ready for you guys to jump into if you're not part of it. And Laurie's waving madly saying, it's over. Give up. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much for joining in. Bye.